Welcome to For the Church, a podcast for the flock of Zion Presbyterian Church in Columbia, Tennessee. We want to help you think biblically about everyday matters. Zion Church exists to join Jesus and his mission to reach people with the gospel and then to equip his people to worship and serve. I'm your host, Keaton Paul, and joining me is my conversation partner and co-host, Seth Scruggs. So this summer, we have been talking about movies. And although it is still technically summer, the air is nice and cool and crisp. There's an ever so slight sense of fall in the air. So we better get through some movies pretty quick. And it's been a minute since we've actually talked about movies. So Seth, why is that?
No reason. No reason.
Oh, okay.
Nothing big. No, my wife had a baby.
Well, I guess that's significant enough.
Yeah, so that's why we're extending our summer series into the fall, is because I had to take a couple weeks off because it was hard to get away when your wife has a baby, because without causing significant marital problems.
Fair enough.
Also I'm still pretty sleep deprived.
Yeah.
But I think especially in those first 2 weeks, I don't think that it would have been worth listening to be here.
Just all over the place. You know.
Absolutely.
I guess that's fair. But, newborns or talking about movies.
I can do both, as evidenced by the fact that I'm here and
you
my wife
here
and baby
now.
are in the other room.
That's exactly right.
Because they needed to get out.
Yeah.
So.
Well, fair enough. So what are we talking about today?
Today we're talking about Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Okay.
The movie.
The movie.
We're not talking about Everything Everywhere All at Once. We're talking about the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once.
We're going to answer all of your questions right here, right now.
Just a disclaimer. I'm just going to head this off at the pass.
Yeah. This is good.
If you haven't seen the movie yet, or if you haven't, maybe you're a little angry at me. This movie is very crass in a lot of ways.
Yes.
There are things that I think as Christians we very clearly have some disagreements with.
Yeah.
To put it mildly.
Mildly.
And all of that is downstream from a lot of what we're going to talk about in this episode today. And so this is definitely one where I would say, if you haven't seen it yet, read about it before, kind of get an idea of what you're going into.
Yeah.
It's nothing, I wouldn't call it excessively sexual or gross, but it is crass.
Yes.
There's nothing.
Yes.
Yeah. So just a disclaimer about this movie going into it. I think that for me, it doesn't personally cross the line. There are certain things that I had actually forgotten about that were in the movie that please forgive me.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's not to the point that I would not necessarily recommend it to someone to watch to understand. Obviously we're still talking about it.
Yeah.
But it is there. So just be aware that if that is something that you're more sensitive to, it is crass.
Yeah.
Just going in there.
Yeah.
So Everything Everywhere All at Once. I'll read the synopsis. A middle-aged Chinese immigrant, played by Michelle Yeoh, is facing an audit by the IRS, a divorce from her husband, her judgmental father, and a fracturing relationship with her daughter, Joy. She must connect various versions of herself to save the multiverse from an evil force, revealed to be another more powerful version of her own daughter. Joy has seen every universe and has decided that it is all meaningless, and she has finally created something powerful enough, an everything bagel, literally, enough to destroy herself in every timeline, and in doing so has created something that will destroy the entire multiverse. It is up to Evelyn to stop her. So just some other information about this movie, kind of why we're talking about it.
Yeah.
This movie was directed by a directing duo known as the Daniels. So Daniel Scheinert and Daniel Kwan. They made a movie called Swiss Army Man. So this is their second feature. They made a feature called Swiss Army Man with Daniel Radcliffe and Paul Dano. That is similarly a little bit crass and a little bit absurd. And this movie, Everything Everywhere All at Once, won 7 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Director, Best Original Screenplay.
Yeah.
And that's really the reason that I wanted to talk about this. I think that it's indicative of our culture in a lot of ways, just in terms of the subject matter.
Yeah.
But it also has this kind of resonating force within the film industry, right?
Absolutely.
In that it won so many awards, and it also won several acting awards and some other technical awards. So it had a pretty big impact,
right?
And it was also, this is a little bit more inside baseball industry kind of thing, but if you're familiar with the Academy Awards, typically, quote unquote, awards movies are released towards the end of the year, so that they're still fresh in everyone's mind when they enter voting.
Yeah.
This movie was released in August, I believe.
Okay.
Was like its official release date. It started in some festivals earlier in the year, and it kind of gained this momentum throughout. And so it has a little bit of a staying power to it that some awards movies and some other movies don't necessarily have. And so that's why we're talking about this movie, is that it's not necessarily that I want to recommend it or that everyone needs to see this movie, and we'll talk more about that in a minute.
Yeah.
But I do think that it's indicative of a lot of what's happening in our culture.
Yeah.
So I'll turn it to you now.
Oh man.
Tell me what you thought about this movie.
Okay. So let's see. I found it was not boring. That, like, we can absolutely. There was nothing boring about it. It has a multiverse and an everything bagel. So honestly, what more could you really want? Yeah, but seriously, like, it. I do tend to enjoy movies, that tend towards a little bit of the absurdist kind of sort of slant, just because I find them interesting. You know, there's an avant-garde type thing about it that I'm like, I appreciate it because it's interesting. In a world of movies, and I'm also a guy who really loves, to put on like a really cheesy Hallmark because it's predictable, blah 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 blah. But if you listen to like really standard pop where where everything's going and it's kind of cheesy, every now and then like throwing on some highbrow, really technical jazz is like, oh, this is, I have no idea where this is going ever. It's so all over the place. And so, especially from that regard, I actually really enjoyed it because it opens up and you're like, okay, this is okay. I think I get where this is going. And then all of a sudden, a couple things happen, and I had a couple moments where I'm like, okay, is this going to be a Matrix type thing? And not really. So if you're watching it, it's totally a thing on its own.
Right.
And the whole time I'm watching it, I'm like, okay, like there's some sort of philosophical significance behind this. And I'm sitting here originally, but like there are so many different like themes. It's chaotic how many different themes there are nihilistic themes, there are existentialist themes, there are rich romantic themes. There are even themes of ethics and value and that kind of stuff. And so all of that's like getting thrown into this movie blender about a multiverse, which seems appropriate. And but I'm like, I don't know what you're trying to say, because you're saying, well, everything, everywhere, all at once. But in all, I really enjoyed it. But it's weird.
Yeah.
But in a good way, I think personally. Like, because it's so hard. It was so interesting. I was not sure where it was going. And then you finally do get to the end, and like maybe read a couple reviews, which I'm sure we'll talk about, and you're like, oh, okay, that was good. I appreciate that. I don't agree with like
Right.
why they did it, and what they're trying to say, but they said it well.
Yeah.
And I think, again, part of, some of the higher forms, specifically in music, I know why you wrote it that way. I think I don't agree with the underlying principles, but it was really interesting.
Yeah.
So yeah, as art, I thought it was very interesting. And there are lots of really great insight into the thinking of the culture while, being able to disagree, which is why we're talking about this movie right now.
Yeah, I agree. I think the way I put it was like, on one hand, I think that this movie is a technical masterpiece.
Yeah.
Like what it's able to pull off in terms of different styles,
Yeah.
different things happening. It was a relatively low budget,
Really?
for a Hollywood movie. I mean, the VFX crew I think was like 9 people. Like we're talking, the Daniels kind of specialize in this kind of hyper creative,
Yeah.
gritty DIY kind of filmmaking, and that comes across on screen.
Yeah.
And it really, like, the fact that they were able to pull off what they pulled off,
Yeah.
it is frankly just incredible. Like
Yeah.
what they're able to do, how big it feels for how also intimate it feels.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is incredible.
Yeah.
And it is a distinct creative
Yeah.
kind of mark.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's a completely original story, right?
Yeah.
And that's a big thing, is that it's multiversal, which if you're familiar with like the Marvel movies, they're kind of delving into that. And just a side note, multiverse is like a parallel universe kind of thing, right? So like there's all these different versions of these characters based on the different decisions they could have made. That's the gist.
Right.
And on that hand, like it's a technical masterpiece.
Yeah.
It looks amazing.
It looks fantastic.
Visually what they're able to pull off with so many different things. On the other hand, it feels to me, for reasons that we're going to get into, it feels very hollow.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that for, like, as a Christian, I think that hollowness kind of comes from my Christian convictions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so it, like you said, it's not necessarily that their message or like what they're trying to say, how they view the world, is not done well. It's done very well.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
very effectively communicated, and in that sense, it's phenomenal.
Yeah,
like it's an amazing film. On the flip side of that, the feeling that I got out of it was that it was just kind of empty. It just kind of felt empty at the end.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, you definitely get to the end. I was talking to some students. I will not name names in order for innocence and whatever, like, people to remain nameless so nobody shames them or anything like that. But like we were talking, I was talking with these students, and they're talking about how people text and stuff, and they're like, we've got we've got a friend who will text and we'll send like a really long text about like, hey, how was your day? Tell me everybody you talk to. I just love you so much, and I'm so thankful to be a part of your life. And and they'll end with like a big question of like, what was the most fantastic and exciting part of your day? They said this friend literally will text us back, "Okay." And that's kind of how this felt. Mm-hmm. In the fact that like it asks huge questions and does it in really vivid, rapid fire ways, and like sucks you into, an everything bagel black hole type thing of like, oh my gosh, these are really big questions. And then you get to the end and you're like, okay, there should be a really big answer, right? And you get to the end and the answer is like, okay.
Yeah. So let's jump into that then.
Yeah.
So I want to start, you mentioned the nihilism and existentialism, but I want to start a little bit like higher level than that.
Yeah,
and kind of work our way down. And so the big thing that I kept thinking about is just how postmodern this movie is.
Oh, so postmodern.
In that the most like notable thing, and this is the most notable thing if you were to read reviews about the movie from like the LA Times or like, Chicago Sun-Times, like all these kind of secular sources in addition to Christian sources. The most notable thing is the form of the film.
Yeah.
So like how the film is made, not even the story necessarily, but how the film is made is like a total disregard for convention.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Most movies that you watch want you to more or less forget that you're watching a movie.
Yeah.
And some people, like a Wes Anderson that's very hyper stylized.
Yeah.
He still kind of wants you to get into his world.
Yeah, right.
This movie isn't really concerned with that.
Yeah.
And so one way that filmmakers will do that is consistent, style of lighting, your lens choices.
Mm-hmm.
There are certain kinds of lenses that do different things. Some are anamorphic, which kind of stretch the image in a way.
Okay.
And then some are spherical, which don't stretch in the same way. All of these things, how you color the film, all of that kind of matters, right?
Yeah.
This movie, every world has a different look and feel. So an aspect ratio, right?
Yeah,
how much of the screen is actually being used.
Okay.
And when you watch this movie, sometimes it's a 4:3, like a very old traditional style aspect ratio. Sometimes it's a wide screen, kind of anamorphic, what you would expect from like a traditional like blockbuster movie. Sometimes it's taller, like a 1:8.5 aspect ratio, which is a different, kind of movie.
Okay.
And so what that does subconsciously or consciously is it's communicating to your brain, like we're in a different place in a different time.
Yeah.
But it calls attention to the fact that you're watching a movie.
Yeah.
It calls attention to the fact that like something is happening.
Yeah.
And so that's one thing. And then the other thing is, as we were mentioning, like nothing is off limits. Right? Nothing can be considered crass.
Right.
In this universe and in this way of thinking, because nothing really matters.
That's right. Yeah.
The only things that matter are the meaning that we give them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so if the only thing that matters is the meaning that we give something, if we don't give it meaning, then it doesn't matter.
Right.
It can't be crass.
Right.
If I don't think it's crass.
Yeah.
And in a way, the filmmakers are doing something that they've done previously in other films and in other works, where they're kind of poking you,
right,
to be like, here's this thing that 50 years ago would be unimaginable.
Right.
30 years ago would have been considered like this transgressive thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But now we've just kind of accepted it.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're just not even gonna, like, it's just a joke.
Yeah. Right. Right.
And part of the joke is people who might be offended by that.
Right. Yeah.
And
for sure.
And if you're outside of the joke, you're going to be confused or offended. And then if you're inside the joke, you're like, yeah, isn't it funny that they're using X, Y, or Z?
Right.
And that extends to sexual matters. That extends to relationships. It extends to fart jokes. Like all of it. In this kind of world, in this kind of postmodern mindset that's happening here, where we're just throwing everything at the wall, basically.
That's right. Yeah.
It's all level playing field.
Yeah.
One example is that there's a scene where the villain character is introduced.
Uh-huh.
Right. And the whole, again, like the idea is these characters are connecting with different versions of themselves in like different parallel universes.
Yeah.
And this one character has kind of transcended all of these universes. She's become so powerful. In the introduction to her, she is wearing a Elvis impersonator costume with a pig on a leash.
Yeah.
She then proceeds to blow up each of these characters and by turning them into confetti.
Yeah.
And it's just this like absolutely absurd.
Yeah.
Absolutely ridiculous. And the movie is filled with things. We've been referencing the everything bagel. What that is the character has kind of basically created this black hole that they're putting everything into. But the black hole itself, it looks like a bagel with everything on it.
Yeah.
But her thing is like, well, no, it's not just an everything bagel, like you normally would. It's report cards and grades and everything that we've put meaning into is like on this thing, and I've realized it means nothing.
Yeah.
And so the whole like postmodern aspect of it is just this, it's chaos.
Yeah.
There's just
utter chaos. Yep.
You have anything to add to that?
No, not really like that really, it's postmodern in like the fullest sense of postmodern. Specifically, so typically postmodernism is ascribed to like architecture and artistry of some sorts, some sort of art form. And this is like absolutely quintessential postmodern in the rejection of convention and meaning of any sort, which it's fun. It's fun to watch people try, because even with we're going to throw convention out the window and get to things without meaning, but there's still meaning and there's still a convention that is at least being appealed to in some capacity, even if it is subconsciously. So you're watching the whole thing happen, but again, they're doing it really, really well, and it moves so quickly throughout that you just keep wanting to watch it. And so, I thought it was really interesting.
Yeah. And so that postmodernism then kind of feeds us into the rest of the themes. Cause that's kind of the core presupposition of the movie.
Yeah, absolutely.
Movie, right? Is we live in this inherently meaningless, chaotic world.
Right.
And then basically the movie provides us with two options. Right. So, and the core enemy of the film is nihilism.
Yeah, that's right.
And so nihilism, you might be able to give me a better, what would be like a good working definition?
In the simplest terms, nothing matters.
Yeah. Specifically in a kind of like hopeless way.
Right.
So, and we'll contrast that with a more existentialist view. And I don't know, I want to caveat this by saying, I don't know that the filmmakers would very specifically ascribe to one or the other, or maybe even a mixture of these views. I don't know that they would even have this kind of particular name for it.
Yeah. Right.
So just caveating that, as I like to do anytime we start describing worldviews.
That's right.
But yes. So this existentialist, this kind of nihilist, view of like nothing matters in a very hopeless way.
Right.
Contrasted with existentialism, which is basically nothing matters, but in a hopeful way.
That's right. Yeah. There's a cynical posture in at least some forms of nihilism. But almost every nihilist ends up having to ascribe meaning somehow. So, the two that always get talked about, and really they are somewhat the forefathers of nihilism in general, are Friedrich Nietzsche and, of all people, Soren Kierkegaard. Nietzsche, German philologist, is more pessimistic in his nihilism, to the place, that like there's no meaning. So what do you need to do? Become really powerful, and then you can dictate what meaning is. Kierkegaard, who the more I read about and think on, the more I'm like, I think he really actually might, because he claims to be a Christian. Kierkegaard does. Nietzsche does not. But Kierkegaard, so he's, there's this Christian, I think he really is a real Christian. But his nihilism is somewhat mocking the Enlightenment. But there's a whole group of nihilists today that you kind of see, especially from late millennials and early Gen Zers, who get really cynical really quick.
Mm-hmm.
And they're kind of trained to do that because pretty much everything they've just been really let down with the world. You're the generation that's gonna that's gonna take over, and and like everything the world's at your fingertips. You can do anything, so just go get it. And start by buying a house.
Wouldn't we love to?
Wouldn't we love to? No, it's so anyway. So you do actually see really a more cynical side of nihilism on the one side, but that does appear to be, the thing that the Daniels here are going after. There was some points of it that I was thinking, are they making a statement for like mental health and against, suicide and that sort of thing? And maybe that's, a part of it. And certainly that kind of nihilism can quickly lead to, those sorts of things. So, fair enough. Good job of getting after that. But the conclusion or the remedy, it is this, like fairly joyful existentialism, a very optimistic existentialism, which not all existentialists were, particularly joyful. In fact, you can actually be an existential nihilist. Those are not necessarily mutually exclusive, but just like how positive are you going to be in their form of existentialism, which is deeply therapeutic. It is, you can find your true self and find love, and then all of your problems will go away, hopefully.
And I think the key thing here is that basically the contrast is between, there's no argument that the world has any meaning inherently, right? Like, that's out the window.
Yeah,
the
that's
question
assumed.
Is, how do you respond to the meaninglessness?
That's right.
In the world.
That's right.
And in the world of this movie, it's like there's no meaning anywhere.
Right.
I have seen every version of reality that exists.
Yes.
There is no meaning.
Yeah. And they say so explicitly.
It's just a statistical inevitability. That's like something it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Yeah. So the question is, and this is the journey that Evelyn, the lead character, goes on, right? Like Joy, this evil version of her daughter, kind of shows Evelyn, like, here's all of this meaninglessness. Like it's all gone. Yeah. And then Evelyn starts to go down that path and says, well, no, I'm just going to choose to create meaning.
That's right. Yeah.
I'm going to choose to have value. And so life in that kind of worldview, in the worldview that the film ultimately lands in, is life is worth living, but only if we decide it's worth living.
That's exactly right.
And we don't really have time to get into all of the implications of this, but at one point they're culminating, right? Like Evelyn is trying to balance these two things, and is about to make this turn into basically from nihilism to a more therapeutic existentialism, is what you were saying. And her husband says, be kind, no more fighting. Yeah. And so there's this idea that maybe kindness is the thing that makes life worth living. Right. And the people around us maybe are the thing, are what make life worth living. It reminded me a lot of the John Lennon song Imagine.
Oh, absolutely.
Just this kind of like, we're all just going to get along and everything's going to be good and everything's going to be okay.
That's right.
And it's a wonderful sentiment.
Yeah. That's right.
And here's the thing. if the world is meaningless,
Uh-huh.
if there is nothing in the world,
Yeah.
that is the only answer.
That's right.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
and that's the thing, is that it is, first of all, I don't think nihilism is able to be fully lived out.
Right. No, of course
because
not.
eventually, because otherwise you would, every person would just kill themselves.
Yeah.
And we wouldn't have a problem with that.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Right? Like,
yeah.
we wouldn't have a problem with that. But instead, what do we tell people who are feeling depressed? We tell them life is worth living.
Yeah, right.
And when you're a Christian, you can say that with full confidence.
That's
right? Like, life is worth living. There is
Yeah.
value to what's going on here.
Right.
But if you're not a Christian, you have to take this kind of existentialist view
Yeah.
of saying, well, life is worth living because you can give it meaning.
Yeah.
Because you
Right.
create this meaning around
That's
yourself.
right. Yeah. Yeah. And you definitely see, even like, how she, like, towards the end, Evelyn, the main character, how she battles the cynical nihilism is with this, like, multiverse jumping kung fu, where all of her moves result in, like, loving gestures of some sorts, whether it's like, she grabs a sword mid-swing and turns it into like a bouquet of flowers, and and then there's other like things that are far more crass.
Yeah.
So just be aware. Another warning. So, but like, so how do we fight the cynicism of this type of nihilism? We fight it by ascribing love, which, is arbitrary, but at the end of the day, it gets the job done because it makes us feel better.
Yeah.
And thus the therapeutic. So, which is, that's the K ending to the, what's the meaning of life? Is there any meaning at all? It is if you want to. Okay.
Well, and I think, because you made the point about Gen, like that late millennial, early Gen Z kind of thing, where it's like, it feels very cynical.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is that what's the kind of later Gen Z and Gen Alpha, like, has that kind of like therapeutic,
Right.
very postmodern,
Yeah.
very much, I'm just here for a good time.
Yep.
And it's on vibes and what,
right.
And that's what it's all about. And,
Yeah.
and I think that this movie kind of appeals to that sensibility.
Oh, for sure.
And I think that a lot of the even older millennials and millennials who I think that they find hope in this kind of story because of non-Christian.
Yeah.
Of that age group, find hope in that story because they can say, because it doesn't feel beaten down by cynicism.
That's right.
And I think, and that may be to the film's credit, like there are a lot of films that are very popular with that age group and my age group, and films that are considered to be like some of the best. Think about your Martin Scorsese films, right? Mm-hmm. Most of those have a very, very, very bleak view of the world.
Yeah, they do.
They're starting in like New York in the 70s.
Yeah.
Not a great place to be if you want to be hopeful. Like, it's very cynical. And so for a long time, the quote unquote like prestige film that, to be taken seriously as an artist. And there was this kind of tortured cynicism in films. And so this movie, I think, again, part of why we're talking about it, represents a bit of a shift.
Yeah.
Where it says, where Martin Scorsese might say, well, the world has no meaning.
Yeah.
The world is chaotic.
Yeah.
But also it sucks.
Yeah, but
and everything's
also,
terrible.
But also don't worry because it sucks. Wait, what?
These guys come and say, yeah, there may not be any meaning, but we're going to be hopeful about it.
Yeah.
And kind of put that spin on it. And I think that's this kind of natural progression. Right.
Right.
And I think this may be a bit of a stretch, and you can stop me if it is, but it's kind of Romans 1, right? In the sense that it's saying there's something we're all looking for.
Right.
There's
Yeah.
something that we all want
Yeah.
and need.
Yeah.
And it, again, part of what felt hollow to me about this film is that it like walked right up to that line and then stopped short.
Yeah. And another thing that I think is appealing about it was the fact that, the answer, especially to people who are living out that worldview, the answer wasn't sentimental or
absolutely.
There's nothing cliche about it at all. And, I think if there had been too many, like, just really trite tautologies, people would have, like, you roll your eyes and you're like, oh my God, yeah, sure. Okay. We'll put that on another bumper sticker and, whatever. There was nothing cliche about it. And so the answer was a hopeful answer, but it was answered in a way that didn't seem too sappy.
Yeah, and I think that that's to the film's credit.
Yeah,
that they're willing to engage in
the
kind of messiness
yes.
of family life, because at the core of this film, even with all of the multiversal trappings, it's a family drama,
right? Oh yeah,
and,
for sure.
And so I think that they're willing to engage and recognize that families are messy.
Yeah,
and one of the more brilliant choices in the filmmaking is that it cuts between this epic, loud battle and this conversation between a mother and daughter.
Right.
And it's kind of drawing these connections between the two and basically saying the same thing are happening.
That's right.
In these two conversations.
Or
in these two sequences. And so I agree with you. Like it embraces that messiness. And if I have a critique for the movie, it's like it just felt so relentless for so long that I didn't feel like we got to know the characters very well.
Oh yeah,
and it didn't give the actors, who are phenomenal actors, the chance to really shine until that kind of last scene, which I think is very, very good. That is probably one of the best things about the movie.
Yeah.
So we move in.
Yep.
Those are the kind of the themes. I would love to delve more. Like we could spend
we could go a long time on that.
So much of it, but we kind of move into this conversation of like why now, and we've kind of touched on this.
Yeah.
And I think as our world becomes increasingly secular, as the idea behind like a supernatural just becomes more and more and more laughable to a lot of people. If there's nothing outside of our world, we have to create meaning from within. And so that's really where this movie starts, right? Like that's the start of the film. And so, this fast-moving, fast-paced, it rejects the traditional styles and structures. This movie itself feels like pushing forward. And it's pushing boundaries, right?
That's right. Yep.
In terms of form and convention.
Yep.
And that appeals to a culture, like I was saying, that is wanting to push boundaries and reject convention.
Right.
And
when
you've been told your whole life that you cannot create your own meaning because there is a God and there's this external force that creates meaning for our world, and we find our meaning in that. And now you're saying, your quote unquote experience is there is no God, there is no supernatural. I am going to create my own meaning. And those traditional conventions, if we could, I'm not calling God a convention, but from a secular worldview, you're saying those are outdated. Right? An idea of a supernatural, the idea of a God is outdated. I get to create my own meaning. I need to reject all the conventions of the past. Because I need to create my own meaning. I need my chance to be myself and to make myself. And so just even in the form of this movie, they're rejecting those conventions. Right? It reminded me a little bit of Pulp Fiction, which I don't know if you've seen Pulp Fiction, but it's it's Quentin Tarantino from the 90s. And it was revolutionary, I think, in a similar way where a lot of people just like saw it for the first time and went, oh, you can do that in a movie? Because that movie is nonlinear.
Yeah.
It's self-referential. It's referencing all these different pop culture things. The first scene and the last scene actually take place at the same time. Like, there's all of this. It is, in many ways, a rejection of traditional storytelling.
Yeah.
And if you haven't seen that movie, you've definitely seen things influenced by that movie.
Oh, of course.
And the whole point about that is it's rejecting convention.
Yeah.
And so when people saw it, they're like, oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
We're making something new.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily a bad thing to push the boundaries of an art form. I think that's great. And that's why I praised the filmmaking of this movie.
Yeah.
In that, there are some things that it's great. And interestingly, this movie does follow a lot of traditional storytelling conventions.
Yeah.
And then it breaks some in other ways.
Right.
And I think that, in some ways, rules are meant to be broken.
That's right.
And it's let's push the boundaries and let's make something new and fresh.
That's right.
At the same time, it can reveal something about the intentions of the filmmakers.
Yeah.
And I think that it does, that coupled with a lot of the themes in this film really does.
Yeah.
I think that the other thing is that we live in a world that is constantly referencing other things and self-referential and, we're always, with as much as everybody is on social media and we all have these like pop culture moments happening all the time.
Yeah.
And this movie is not like, it's not worried about you like being aware that you're in the movie, right? And so each of the different worlds kind of references another style of movie.
Yeah.
There's a sequence where the Evelyn character is in this world, she's a movie star.
Yeah.
And she's having this kind of unrequited love moment with her husband.
Yep.
And it's shot in a very, very similar style to another filmmaker. Almost like to a T. It looks like the films of Wong Kar-wai. And that's on purpose. Like it's for someone like me who's like, oh, that's such and such a film.
Yeah.
Even the casting of people like Michelle Yeoh and Kiwi Kwan, right? Michelle Yeoh is a kung fu star.
Oh,
like that's kind of what she's known for.
Okay.
And the fact that when the movie opens, she's not a kung fu star.
Right.
Right. Like she's just like a immigrant housewife trying to make ends meet.
Yep.
And then becomes, this kung fu star. That's a very specific thing. Kiwi Kwan, for those of you who don't know, he was in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom and the Goonies and several other things. Again, similarly, is like there's a little bit of a play on who he is as a person.
Okay.
Because he plays this kind of goofy guy, and then you're kind of upending those conventions. So it's this kind of self-referential thing, right? And to an extent, all movies do that, where you cast Matthew McConaughey because he's Matthew McConaughey, and you kind of know what you're gonna get. That's called being a movie star. But then also, it is in the bounds of this movie. Very self-referential, very much trying to call attention to the fact and then upend your expectations with it.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I think that all those things kind of combined make it appealing to a culture and ultimately to people who wanted to vote for it for the highest awards that the industry can give, because it captured the imagination in a way that other things didn't. And now, this is my slight Oscar soapbox. Does that mean that it was the best film of that year? Maybe. Are the other films that were nominated that year good? Yeah. I've seen most of them, and they're all pretty good. All Quiet on the Western Front is a great film. Tar's pretty good. Like there are other movies that year that are equally like laudable. This is totally subjective, but it is a democratic process of lots and lots and lots of people. The way that the Academy votes, for those of you who don't know, each branch, so like director, editor, so on, votes for their award. So directors vote for directors, editors vote for editors, and then everyone votes for Best Picture.
Okay.
So the fact that this movie won so many awards, there was like pretty overwhelming consensus in that regard. Doesn't necessarily make it the best movie. Doesn't mean that it'll be the movie that lives on in our consciousness for the longest. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But it obviously is resonating with people.
Yeah, for sure.
So then that brings us to, how do we respond?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to say anything? I'll let you lead. You're the pastor here.
Well, okay. So, I mean, to be fair, probably the best, one of the best theological synopses that I've read in a while about a movie the Gospel Coalition did about this. And so I'll just read this quote because it's, they're thinking a lot about movies and the gospel. So they say this, in spite of the movie's irreverence and decidedly secular existentialist response to the threat of nihilism, we find it the echoes of transcendent meaning and value. For Christians watching the movie, it's hard to miss the depiction of sacrificial act of grace in the movie's resolution, whether it's from Wayman rescuing Evelyn from despair or Evelyn risking everything to save Joy. And that was really my main takeaway as I was watching it, that I did catch. I wasn't sure exactly what they were trying to say until I read some other reviews, but I'm like, that sacrificial love that's so tied, a mother for her child, or a husband for his wife, is inescapable. But instead of giving the answer to the huge question being, okay, I think the gospel answers it in full and vibrant color, in a grand finale that you kind of go, okay, that's satisfying finally, to that really big question. And so, I think Christians can watch it and be like, yeah, that's you did that incredibly well by telling, in really artistic ways, the big questions. You didn't really give a good answer. You kind of dipped your toe in the water because that's built in you. But we actually have the real answer, and it's this. So I really appreciate that.
And again, I think that's that Roman 1, this idea that this eternity is kind of imprinted on our hearts.
That's right. Yeah.
There is something transcendent printed in our hearts where, like I said, like there, in theory, if there's no transcendent meaning, there's no reason to save someone.
Right. Yep. Yeah. Absolutely.
Now, obviously, in practice, that's not how it works out most of the time.
Right.
But I think that's key. The other thing that I kind of kept coming back to is that because we do believe that there's something outside of our world,
right,
that's creating meaning. And one of the things, and maybe this is a little soapbox for me too, I think something that radically changed my understanding of who God is the idea that he's not only the creator, but also sustainer. So like Colossians, Paul will say, like, in him all things hold together.
Yeah, right.
And so the idea being, it's not just, we're not nihilists.
Right.
We're not existentialists. We're not postmodern.
Right.
Because that would say there is no meaning.
Yeah.
We create the meaning. But we're also not like a deist where it's like, well, God created the world, but then just kind of left it.
Yeah.
And he's not really involved. So in that sense, we still kind of have to create our own meaning, right? Like even there, God is like sustaining,
right.
I don't want to misattribute the quote, so I won't try to attribute it, but it's like I heard someone describe it one time, there's not an atom that Jesus isn't like actively holding together.
Yeah, that's right.
Right?
Yeah.
Like the world is sustained and like keeps turning because God is involved.
Yeah.
And I think that is a key to the Christian hope and the Christian life,
right,
on so many levels.
Yeah.
Because it's not just that God created our world and therefore we have to kind of follow this pattern
right,
that he's created. It's that he is active and involved in our world.
Yeah.
And so the things that we do, whether it's what clothes am I going to put on when I wake up this morning, or who's going to win this election, or what's going to happen in this country overseas, like all of that is, sustained and organized and controlled by God.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean
right.
we don't pick out what clothes we're going to wear in the morning.
Yeah.
Please do that.
Yeah.
But it does mean that ultimately it's not every single thing is dependent on me.
That's right. That's exactly
It's not
right.
dependent on me to create the meaning and to figure out everything.
Yeah, and especially on that note, there does seem to be this weird pressure for every decision and everything we do to be the most significant thing that we can possibly do. And there are some things that like are good and right things, and the Lord is sustaining and holding it together. And it, in some capacity, it does have meaning insofar as we're doing it to glorify and enjoy God forever. But also, it can just be a thing. Like washing your dishes can just be a thing, and it can just be a thing, and you glorify and enjoy God forever. Those are not mutually exclusive. And so, it's not meaningless. But also part of the beauty of God holding all things together is, not everything is equally as weighty. And so not everything has to have some sort of significance ascribed to it. It can just be a beautiful thing for what it is. Clean dishes.
I do love some clean dishes.
Clean dishes go a long way. Yeah.
All right. Well, that was Everything Everywhere All at Once.
All at once.
Next week, we are going to be discussing A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, a movie about Fred Rogers starring Tom Hanks. So it'll be a good time. We'll see you then.